Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar, the DECIDE GBADs webinar, in which we have two presentations. The overall topic of today's presentations are the estimation of greenhouse gas emissions and the welfare burden of animal diseases, both topics that explore the sustainability in livestock production. And we'll have two presentations, and all the questions will be taken at the end when these two presentations are done. But please put them in the chat as soon as you have a question, so that you don't forget it, and we'll get back to it then at the end of the two presentations. The first presenter of today is Armando Rivera. He is a PhD candidate at Université Libre de Bruxelles in the Spatial Epidemiology Lab. And he has developed tools for data modeling, climate change, and greenhouse gas estimations in international organizations, including FAO. Armando, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Please let me share my screen. Yeah, can you see my presentation?
Yeah, it's in presentation mode. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Armando Rivera. Thank you for the introduction. I am a PhD candidate at the University Libre of Brussels. And I will talk a little bit about my experience and what I am doing about estimating greenhouse emissions and how this is really important for the sustainability for livestock production. I will start with a general presentation of the greenhouse emissions, how to apply that to the livestock sector, and some experience that I had during my last years working in different projects where we accomplished actually to reduce greenhouse emissions and how we did that. So that is going to show you a good perspective of what we can do and what is the importance to measure and monitor the greenhouse emissions. So what I want to, how I want to start is with this beautiful graph. It was published in 2020, and it showing the total greenhouse emission by the year 2016 from the different sources. And as you can see, almost 73% of the greenhouse emissions. Sorry, I have an echo. Can you hear me? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, it's just I was hearing some noise. So in this graph, we can see the total greenhouse is coming from the energy. That means sorry, something happened. Now I'm back. Yes. Okay, sorry. Yeah, and almost 20% of the total emissions are associated to the agriculture industry. And from that, as you can see, almost percent of the total emissions in this graph is shown that is coming from the livestock and manure management. The situation here is that it's not a big picture because a lot of energy is used in the industry for transformation, for the transformation of the products, for the transportation of the feed components, for the transportation of the products to the market, when you transport some feed materials between exports and import between countries, about deforestation. So it's not a big picture of what we want to accomplish. And FAO is making a really good work trying to see all the emissions associated to the complete production system, and that is the life cycle assessment. So what is that important? Because the emissions are not just in the animals, the emissions are associated to what are the feed components used to feed these animals. And in that case, we have fertilizers, we have pesticides, we have land use change made in some countries to transport all these feed components to another country, for example, to feed specific animals, and what are the emissions that are produced directly from the animals, from the dairy fermentation, from manure management, and what are the emissions that are produced after and post-farm, that means for the transportation of the different components of the different products where they are transforming in the industry, or when they are to different. And all of that is accounting around 6 billion tons of CO2 equivalent. And if we see the complete picture, that is around 11% of the total emissions worldwide. Now, if we see the emissions per species, we know that there is one species that is actually the main problem, and that is cattle, which is accounting almost 61% of the total. Sorry about that, but it's taking me out on. But anyway, so we know now which species is having the complete problem of the emissions. And if we see about the emissions per gas, we know that methane actually is accounting more than 50% of the total emissions in all the species. So that is the importance about accounting and to measure the greenhouse emissions. We need to know exactly where is the problem, which species and where is that located, and which is the gas that we need to attack in order to reduce greenhouse emissions. And why is that important? I will explain a little bit now with an example. So let's imagine that we have a demand of 100 liters of milk per day in
Sorry,
a specific
Armando,
location.
we don't see your slides now.
You can see now?
Yes, I see your slides, Armando.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So let's imagine that we have a demand of 100 liters of milk per day, and we have two types of animals. As you can see in the picture up, we have a really healthy animal with good pastures in really good conditions, and which milk yield is around 20 liters per milk per day. And we in the down part we have not another animal that is not so is not good in good conditions. As you can see, the pastures are not so good. The health probably is not so good, and which milk yields is around 4 liters per milk per day. And the situation is that this is not so uncommon. In Ecuador, for example, and I will see, and I will show you some results there. The average of the milk yield per animal is around 5 to 6 liters per day. In Europe, it's around 20. So we really have really inefficient animals, which are supplying this demand with a bigger number of animals, with a bigger population, just to supply this demand. And for the first case, we need around 5 animals to supply the 100 liters per day. And for the other case, we need around 25 animals to supply the same demand. Now, the problem is this good or this bad? We cannot say it if we see just these numbers. And this is why the International Panel on Climate Change create these guidelines to estimate the greenhouse emissions, and they were putting emission factors for different activities that the animal is accomplishing. For example, emission factor for growing, emission factor for moving, emission factors for lactation, and so on. So, but in essential, the process is almost the same. So we define production system. That means a group of animals that have the same productivity in the same conditions. Then we are collecting data from this group of animals. That means the health parameters, manure management, what the weight of the animals, and so on, and make data processing with data quality. We really need to know exactly that the data that we were collecting, it's good or bad. So we are verifying if there is some outliers, and then if we identify these outliers, we need to come back and collect more data to make all the results more accurate. And at the end, we process all these data sets and to estimate the greenhouse emissions. All these process and all these formulas are described in the IPCC guidelines that are continue updating. And the last one I think is 2021. So every year they are publishing new updates from a group of experts, of some experiments, of peer review papers, where they see exactly what are the emission factors associated to the industry. And now, why is that important? Because now we can put numbers, and that is the best part about what we are doing right now. So, for example, we know that an animal that is more heavier than has these characteristics, for example, like the up one, like in the picture up, is producing around 9 kilograms of CO2 equivalents, while the other animal, because it's less heavy, let's say it's almost half of the weight of the animal, is producing around 5 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. So if we see that the emissions per animal, we can see that the animal that is less heavy actually is producing less emissions. But if we see the total population to supply that demand, we know that actually the animal who has a bigger milk yield actually is producing a total of 45 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. The group of animals, the 5 animals to supply that demand, while the 25 animals are producing around 125 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. And if we divide that those emissions by the total demand, like let's say the 100 liters that actually the industry or the market is demanding, we have a number for efficiency, and that is really good because with that we can compare. So we have animals who are really efficient on producing products, and we have animals who are really inefficient. And the objective of all of this is to transform these inefficient animals into really productive animals. And how we do it? If we measure exactly what are the emissions that they are producing, and if we know exactly how the industry is working in every production system. Now, that will help to see how is the productivity in intensive feedlots, where the animals are efficient, but at the end the well-being of the animal so good. This is that we can discuss later with the other presentation. And at the end, we have different type of areas with they are really African. These are no animals. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, Armando.
Yeah, and then
their cameras, then I hope that the connection becomes a little bit more stable. Not you, no, but the rest. Audience.
And the important thing is to know exactly how is the behavior of the production system in the different regions and different countries. Because while in some countries the objective is to produce milk and meat, in other countries it's about the status. For example, in Africa there are countries where the farmer with more animals it's seen with a more status than the others. So they tend to kept more number of animals without even producing anything at all. So that is really bad, because the objective is for the production, but we really need to understand what is the behavior of the industry in order to know how to reduce greenhouse emission in those specific situations. And I will talk a little bit one of my experience that I had from 2017 in Ecuador, that is the Climate Smart Livestock project in Ecuador. So what we did here is we identify several areas all over the country where we apply 96 good livestock practices, which was mainly about record management, irrigation, soil fertility, manure management, rotational grazing. That is one of the most important ones that we had really good results, because we were able that the animals were getting even better weights and the productivity were increasing just, by dividing the areas for grazing and to make a really rotational and really well organized grazing for the animals. The situation is that the farmers didn't know how that works, and when we came the first time with the project, they said, okay, you can test it this half of hectare or this small space of the farm in order to see if you will have results. And after some time, we were having really good results in that small area that they were letting us put our good practices. And after that, they were expanding the complete practices to the complete farm. So we really had good results in 7 provinces around all over Ecuador. That means we were testing that in the coastal area with the heat, in warm environments. We were testing in provinces that were in the mountains that it's cold environment, and in the jungle there was a production system in the jungle where we were testing those good livestock practices. And the thing is that we were defining these good livestock practices together with the farmers. That means we were not coming and saying this is the rules. We were joining them together and say, okay, what are the best practices that you think are good for your environment, for your location? And then they were naming a group of practices, and then we were applying the best ones that were good for reducing greenhouse emissions. And with that, we were able to, in 160 farms, to reduce in 2 years of introducing good practices, we were able to reduce almost 20% of the total emissions in these 165 farms. And we were able to increase the productivity in around 17%. So yes, we had really good results, and actually the measurement of the greenhouse emissions were letting us show to the world actually that the results and the productivity can be good with the environment when we are applying really small practices that were actually not really expensive. So we were demonstrating in the exercise that with really small change and by training the farmers, they will know exactly how to reduce greenhouse emissions. And with numbers, that is the best part, because we were measuring to measure the change is the best way to show that actually you will have results. And then with that example, doing the measurement during 4 years, and we were for a projection. Even we made a projection for the following years. What will happen if the country, the 20% of the total farms are applying these good practices? How is going to be the behavior and how we can reduce as a country the greenhouse emissions? Sorry, I almost finished. So what I want to say is that there are a lot of new initiatives worldwide, and one of the main important is this global methane pledge. It's one that more than 100 countries were signing to reduce the 30% of emissions of methane by 2030, according to the measure of 2020. But the country to accomplish this in 10 years is a huge goal of these huge objectives for this project. However, the only way to do that is to measure and to know exactly that the standards of these measurements are comparable between the countries. Because if they are not doing to demonstrate that a country actually accomplished that objective. So my last message is the only way to create change and to so that is really the key part for for improving and to accomplish the objectives of reducing greenhouse emissions. And by measure, we will know exactly with numbers how good a production system is or is changing to reduce greenhouse emissions, and to know exactly that is good actually for the environment. And the best part about that is that you can demonstrate that by improving the efficiency of the animals, you can get really better results. And the most important thing is to be aware of climate change, because I went to many conferences, and in many conferences, it depends if the conference is associated to researchers or to the industry, the message is different. So some people tend to defend their position about climate change is really extreme, is really bad. Like the industry is saying, well, it's not so bad. Methane is a short greenhouse gas, so we should then compare with CO2. So there are different methods, but at the end, the problem is there, and the only way to reduce greenhouse emissions is if we measure and then we perform any action to reduce it. Yeah, sorry for taking some minutes, and thank you so much. I will be open for the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Armando, for your very nice and interesting, thought-provoking presentation. I already see a lot of questions in the chat. You may want to have a look at them, and then you can answer them after Bea's presentation. And just, well, all people that are not presenting, please stop their videos, because that hopefully makes the connection a little bit more stable. I'm sorry for the technical instability. Bea. Beatriz Morante is a postdoctoral research assistant at IRTA in Barcelona. She's also one of the data leads in the DECIDE project for pigs. And she will be presenting to us the welfare burden and how we are thinking about including that in tools, decision support tools, which is a very challenging task in the DECIDE project. Bea, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerdien, for the presentation. I'm gonna start sharing the screen. I hope there are no much trouble on hearing me well. Can you see the full screen mode now?
Yeah, and I can hear you well, Bea.
Perfect. Okay, so well, welcome everybody, and thank you for having me here today. As Gerdien mentioned, I will focus on the welfare burden of animal diseases. It is a different topic, but also related to sustainability for sure. And actually, that's how I would like to start, right? I would like to put the animal welfare in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. So why animal welfare is important for sustainability. So as you may know, the Sustainable Development Goals were proposed at the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development in Rio de Janeiro in 2012. And this set of goals meet urgent environmental, political, and also economic challenges. And most of them, I would say, are avenues that can be exploited to advance animal welfare and vice versa. And this later becomes, I would say, very, very evident with the One Health concept that most of you, I'm sure, know very well. This concept defends that critical linkage of animal welfare to global concerns involving human health, food security, and also a healthier environment, right? And that's why I guess both the DECIDE and also the GBADs projects aim somehow to assess this welfare burden of animal diseases, which is certainly challenging. So focusing now on DECIDE, which is the project I'm involved with, this welfare aspect is included or involved in Work Package 4. As you can read here, the main objective of Work Package 4 is to determine the economic, but also the welfare burden of prevalent contagious production diseases, and also to ensure prioritization of control measures for reduction of further spread, cost effectiveness, and increased welfare. And specifically within this objective, there's task 4.3 that directly aims to assess the relationship between health, disease, and welfare. So before moving forward on this task, we check on the theoretical framework for this relationship. And at least I'm just aware of only this work from Denmark, where the authors established a suffering score for different diseases and welfare conditions in cattle and pigs based on the aggregation of severity, duration, and frequency of clinical entities of the diseases, right? According to the existing literature and also to expert acknowledged elicitation. I think that work is very, very nice, but it still is a theoretical framework, better than nothing, right? But as Gerdian said, we aim to create tools based on data, on real data, to assess this relationship, to assess this welfare burden of animal diseases. So moving from this theoretical framework, we wonder what are the real tools that we have to assess on-farm welfare, right? And one of the tools that has more scientific support, I would say, is the welfare quality protocol that also most of you might be aware of. Briefly, this welfare quality protocol was developed from 2004 to 2009 by different European countries and different European institutions, and as you can see listed here, it is kind of a change in the paradigm because it considers this multidimensional approach of welfare. It does not only consider environmental-based measure, it also considers animals-based measures. And the welfare measurement is provided in 4 levels. There's a color code based on the score obtained. As you can read here, not classified, less than 20 points, acceptable between 20 and 54, enhanced 55, 79, and excellent 80 to 100. This welfare quality protocol is also interesting because it's used to certify on-farm and slaughter welfare in different European countries and in different languages. So I would say it's one of the tools that we have nowadays to assess welfare that, as I said, has more scientific support out there. So what we thought in DECIDE is what if we monitor one batch a group of animals. At IRTA, we focus on pigs, so that's why the pilot was performed in pigs. But the idea was to follow a batch of fattening pigs across time and see if we were able to identify some deviations on these welfare scores, and see if that correlated with some health issues or any management modification or alteration. So that pilot project was conducted on a digitalized commercial fattening farm located in Lleida in Spain. As you can see here, it has 6 independent units. These buildings are located, as you can see, in the same space, but as I said, they are considered independent units. Each unit has 54 pens of about 12-14 pigs each pen. So there are about 700 pigs in each unit and 4,200 pigs in the whole farm, considering the whole buildings, all buildings. It works with an all-in, all-out management system, and pigs enter with about 20 kilograms up to 110 kilograms when they are when they go to the slaughterhouse. So the whole fattening period or fattening duration is about 20 weeks. So this farm, as I said, it's digitalized. It has a lot of sensors. It controls environment, internal environment through sensors, temperature sensors, humidity, CO2, and also ammonia. It also controls feed and water consumption at the unit level. It also, as you can see in the picture, holds sound talks, which is a system to record cough in pigs, which provides a respiratory health score daily. And they also share with us clinical and diagnostic data. So again, to put this into a figure, the idea was to assess welfare continuously in time in a following up fattening batch of pigs, and cross this welfare data with sensor data, clinical, and also diagnostic data. So as I mentioned, the welfare quality protocol considered this multi-dimension aspect of welfare. It focuses on 4 principles, which are good feeding, good housing, good health, and appropriate behavior. Each of these principles is evaluated through different criteria, as you can see here, and criteria are assessed by really specific measures. Today, I'm going to focus on health, because at the very end, our objective within DECIDE is to try to correlate this welfare with health. Is there any relationship here, and how we can assess this relationship? So for the good health, the welfare quality protocol considers 3 criteria, which are absence of injuries, absence of disease, and absence of pain induced by management procedures. And you can see here the measures that are considered to assess these criteria. Lameness, wounds on the body, tail biting, coughing, sneezing. Well, you will see some of them now, just to provide an overall picture of the measures that are considered when we assess health with the welfare quality protocol in pigs. So just to provide some images, I hope you can see my, well, here there's a pig with an hernia, a pig with some skin condition, ear biting, and some wounds on the body. All these conditions are considered in this health score of the welfare quality protocol. And here you will hear a pig coughing. So every time the pig coughs, accounting both, is accounted for the frequency of coughing, just as an example. Ah, sorry. Okay. So with these record forms, you go there, you spend about 4 hours to do the whole quality protocol assessment, and you record all these measures. Usually it is random. There are some randomly you choose some pens to assess these measures and these criteria. And at the very end, you can enter these results, these records in this simulation webpage to obtain the final welfare quality results. So as I mentioned, you get a score for each welfare criterion, then an overall score for each welfare principle, and finally an overall welfare score. That's what you get from entering the results in that simulation webpage. So specifically, we did 8 farm visits, more or less every 15 days, every 2 weeks. We assessed 4 units, and each of these closed units were considered as a farm. So the unit 5.01 and 5.02 were considered as one farm, farm 5.0, and well, there's a mistake. Instead of 5.0 and 5.02 should be 1. 1.01 and 1.02 was considered as a whole farm. So 2 farm systems and 2 evaluators. So each evaluator was assessing welfare in each of these 2 farms. So here you have the scores obtained across time and across the different visits performed. So that's the overall score for each of the welfare criteria or principles, sorry, which are the good feeding in blue, the good housing in orange, good health in gray, and appropriate behavior in yellow. You'll see that surprisingly, or at least in this case, the scores of each of these welfare criteria principles are not really varying across time. I would say they are quite stable, especially if you focus on the health one, which is the gray. It's quite stable. But let's have a closer look to this good health principle. So if we split this good health principle scores into each criteria, we see that absence of pain induced by management procedure is stable across time because it considers castration until docking. In this case, castration was not performed, but tail docking was performed. So that's why, because this is constant across time, this criteria is always scored the same. Then we may have some modifications or some variations in the other 2 criteria. So we have absence of injuries in blue in this case and absence of diseases in orange. So well, I could identify in each of the farms, let's say 3 red spots where those scores were lower. And I thought, well, what could be the cause? Why this health score goes a bit down here? So taking into account the measures that these scores consider, and the measures are listed here: mortality, coughing, sneezing, pumping, twisted snout, etc. I thought, well, probably that could be due to coughing and sneezing, because all the other conditions are not really common in the actual pig production. It's not really common to find rectal prolapse or twisted snouts nowadays. So probably that could be due to coughing and sneezing. So I checked this, I could check this with the frequency of coughing and sneezing, and this is the result. So from our own records, you could say that there are 2 increases in coughing, basically in coughing, which is the blue line, sneezing is the orange line. But these 2 increases in the coughing frequency is not really correlated with the decrease in the score. So I thought, well, let's cross-check this with the coughing records from Santos, which is the sensor. And actually, that's what the sensor gave us. The sensor gave a decrease in the respiratory health score, meaning more coughing at the end of the fattening period than at the beginning. Again, made not a lot of sense. It was not really reflecting the decrease that we saw on the welfare, on the health score. Anyway, we check what happened with the clinical records, and yes, these pigs had an outbreak of Mycoplasma pneumoniae, more or less at the middle of the fattening period. Mycoplasma pneumoniae is a very common pathogen, respiratory pathogen in pigs that usually affects the fattening period and that cause coughing. So it makes sense. Pigs had an outbreak of Mycoplasma pneumoniae, start coughing more or less at the middle of the fattening period, and that's why the sensors detect a decrease in the respiratory health score from the middle of the fattening period until the end. So again, I thought, well, then why we have this decrease? And the other aspect that could influence this decrease is basically mortality. And yes, it is true that at the beginning, of the fattening period, the mortality was higher. So at the very end, I think that this decrease that we observed in this health score at the beginning of the period probably is mainly due because of mortality. So just, and this is just focusing on the health score. There are many other principles, as I said, feeding behavior to consider, right? So it's very complex, but what I could say, or at least from this preliminary data, and I don't know if you will agree or not, maybe that's something to discuss, but that at least in this case, disease occurrence did not have an observable impact directly on the welfare quality health score. Mortality, yes, but not coughing or sneezing. That was not really reflected on the welfare quality health score. The reason why this could happen, I think, could be because the scores, as you could observe, consider multiple measures, not only coughing or sneezing or a specific disease or clinical signs. Those criteria really incorporate a lot of measures, multiple measures. Also because measurements are random, you don't pick that pen that pigs are coughing or have that clinical sign. You decide which pens are you going to assess before going inside, not to bias the score, right? So measurements are random, and you may not pick some clinical sign or some disease. And also, it's a single assessment. Even though we did this continuously in time, every 2 weeks, at the very end, it's just one day at one specific moment. So you may miss a lot of information. So in this case, still other welfare criteria, as I said, need to be evaluated. Maybe more batches, but so far that's the results we have. So now we are also just, this is as a conclusion, and also as next steps within the DECIDE. Still, it's not that we forget a bit about these welfare assessments, but it is true that it is very time consuming and you may miss a lot of information. So we would explore accelerometers as a way to assess animal behavior in a real-time continuous manner. That's something that still we don't have results, so it's very preliminary, but that's something to come. We did the first test with some fattening pigs, and so far goes well. So maybe in next GBADs and DECIDE seminars, I could provide some insights. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to explain these preliminary results, and I'm happy to discuss whatever you consider. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bea. Okay, we'll quickly go to answering the questions. Armando, there are quite some questions for you in the chat. You've answered some. I think there's one from David Graham. Do the emissions from the rumen of adult cows correlate so well with body weight? Can you answer that, please?
Sorry, what was the question?
Do the emissions from the rumen of adult cows correlate so well with body weight?
Yeah, definitely. There is a direct relation that more heavier animals tend to. I mean, if we just take it into account the weight of the animals and not all the other parameters like manure management or energy for activity. If we just focus on the weight of the animals, if the animals are heavier, they tend to emit more emissions. So yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, and then there was another question of David Graham. What is the basis of reduction in emissions? Fewer animals with same level of emission or reduced emission per animal?
It depends. For example, let's assume there are several countries that are presenting the results in total number of emissions, and they said we measure and we have 100 kilograms of CO2 equivalent, and we reduce 20% at the end of 30 years. But there are other countries or other projects where they are showing the reduction of greenhouse emissions in the kilograms per kilogram of protein, for example. And they are saying, okay, this was my efficiency in this year, and I am reducing in 10 years 20%. It depends how they want to show the message, and that is there is not an agreement on how it had to be shown, because at the end, if you are changing the efficiency of the animals, that's meaning that the animals are now reducing greenhouse emissions per product that they are producing. So to supply and demand, you know exactly how much emissions you are reducing. But at the same time, if you have the same number of animals, that means that you have a bigger amount of greenhouse emissions. So it's more about the message that you want to show and how you want to show your results. But at the end, I think that if we focus just on the global demand or the demand of a specific area, then we will know exactly how emissions can be reduced, because at the end, to supply this demand, you need less animals, and that is the objective. Yeah.
Thank you, Armando. David, if that doesn't answer your questions, please speak up or put something in the chat. But now I want to pose a question to Bea from Meamnila. Welfare quality seems to be more long-term versus the short clinical disease episodes. What temporal frequency do we want in DECIDE?
Well, that's a very good question. I completely agree. Welfare quality seems more for long-term or for an overall overview on welfare rather than a specific welfare problems, issues that you may have at a certain time point. That's why I think we should explore other avenues to monitor welfare. I think that's something we need all to work on, because there's not really any tool out there to welfare, I would say, or not a lot of tools. It's not that there's nothing out there, but it is still very challenging to assess welfare continuously. What temporal frequency do we want in DECIDE? I'm not sure. Probably depends on the tool, on what tool are we talking about. But in my mind, to really assess the linkage between health and welfare, we should be able to assess welfare on time, even though it is challenging. But that's maybe a personal opinion.
Thank you, Bea. Armando, I see one question left in the chat, I think, that you haven't answered yet. A question from Jonathan Rushton. Does the proportion of CO2 emissions from cattle reflect that their importance as a livestock terrestrial species in terms of biomass and value globally?
That is a really good question. I was seeing actually there is this study published during this year that it was showing the biomass according to the biomass of the population. And we were seeing a lot of biomass of just livestock production systems, just to supply that demand of what the people want to meet. And it was really interesting because actually it's in general perspective, in a global calculation, we always are calculating emissions per animal. And then if we have more animals, then we know exactly we will, as a result, we have a lot of more emissions. But if we have heavier animals, that means a lot more biomass and so on. That means we will have even more emissions at the end. So I think that the key here is that in the future, and I know that there are several programs. For example, I know that there is one country in Europe that actually is reduced total amount of animals. So And at the end, I saw that there are other countries who are going to the farmers and say, hey, if you are not measuring your greenhouse emissions and reducing in the next years, you will have some bills to pay. I mean, there is some fines that the government are putting to reduce greenhouse emissions. So the answer to the question is, yeah, it's not reflecting directly, but yes, it has a relation to the global biomass of that we have just for the livestock production system. And I like actually that picture because it shows actually what is the problem. We have more biomass of cows than we have probably of population, and that is kind of scary, but it's just my reflection of what I saw on the graph and on the study that I was reading really fast.
Thank you, Armando. And then there's one last question of Ben Huntington in the chat. It's a very long story, so you may want to read it. He was interested in the net change in CO2 equal considering not only changes in productivity, but also the investment to get there. Restricted to farm level, this could include the impact of improved infrastructure, wider this could involve impact on the environment of investment in R&D and processing or marketing facilities. An analogy could be about modern versus old car. I drive an old car that has higher emissions because I don't want to create the carbon footprint of generation of a new vehicle. I don't have the figures to back up this choice, but they would be helpful in automotive and agricultural sectors. Any response on that, Armando?
Can you hear me probably?
Yes, your sound
Hello?
is not.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my connection is unstable, but anyway, I don't know if I understood good the question, but I will speak a little bit about the population has for greenhouse emissions. It's really impressive for me because I'm coming from Ecuador, and the behavior in Ecuador about greenhouse emissions, the conditions are completely different, but it's completely different of what is happening here in Europe, for example. People tend to reduce the consumption of meat. They prefer to transport in train to reduce the greenhouse emissions than flight, which I mean, it's something that in Ecuador cannot be imagined. I mean, my community or my friends are never thinking about, hey, let's travel by train because the greenhouse emissions are reduced. Hey, let's buy bio products because it's better because of the welfare of the animals. Let's buy eggs with free range chickens because it's good for the chickens. No, in Ecuador it's more about what is cheaper and we buy that product. So I think that the behavior is changing in the world, and that is really good. And we have to actually change our how we measure our greenhouse emissions according to this new market that is coming. Because yes, there are a lot of people who are demanding products that are low in greenhouse emissions, and we need to supply them. How? If we measure and we actually create really trustable products that the people can say, hey, okay, if I am consuming this, it's gonna be good for the environment because yes, there are studies and there are measurements that say this is a good product for lowering my greenhouse emissions. So I hope that I understood well the question.
Thank you, Armando. I don't see any more questions in the chat. If there's any burning questions, please open your microphone and speak out. Thanks, Armando from Ben. So I think we are. It's about time to stop this this meeting. I'm very grateful to the presenters that gave some really thought-provoking talks. I wish them well in their future research, because I think there's a lot to do still, and very, very interesting topics. I thank you for participating in this Zoom meeting and for all your interesting questions. And I hope to see you another time. I think in October or November we'll have another GBADs DECIDE meeting. So please keep an eye on the messages that you receive by email. Thanks a lot, everybody.